Hi, this is Tim Bezemuska, composer, producer and audio engineer for Launchpad Music Services. In this video I will show you a few tips and techniques to get a good and solid low end, without the kick and the bass getting in each other's way. I will use electronic dance music examples, but these techniques can be used for any music style. First of all, it's very important that you choose a kick and a bass sound which fit well together. A certain kick or bass can sound very good on their own, but if they don't really fit together, then you'll have to spend a lot of work to get an acceptable end result. So make sure that you spend some time trying out a few different kicks and a couple of different bass sounds before settling on a good combination. Now try to find the ideal note range of the bass. Go up to high and the bass loses power, and low end. Go to low and it starts to sound muddy and undefined. Take this bass for example. From this note downward it starts sounding muddy, so I know I don't want to go lower than that note. And this is the highest acceptable note. This one still has enough low end. If I would go up higher, there will also be a chance that it starts clashing with the other instruments in the song. So now I know the range of notes that I can use. Some kicks have a distinctive pitch. Make sure that you tune these kick drums in reference to your bass. Listen to this example. You can hear the frequencies clashing and it doesn't sound very good. Now there are two ways to do this. You could use a tuner plugin to see if it can detect the pitch of the kick, but usually these tools have a very hard time detecting the pitch of very short transient sounds. As you can see here, the tuner is unable to detect the right pitch. This is the case most of the time, so we have to do it by ear. To make this easier, you can pitch the kick up one octave. As you can hear, the pitch is much easier to detect. Make a short loop of the kick and the bass playing at the same time. We also transpose the bass an octave up, so that the pitches of both are closer together. Now start tuning the kick until you can hear that they are both in tune. We now pitch the bass and the kick an octave down again. Let's take another listen at that loop. As you can hear, it sounds much better. One of the best ways to make the kick and bass mix well together is to make sure that the bass note and the kick drum never play at the same time. This way, they don't get in each other's way. But sometimes you come up with a great bass pattern and you do want the kick and the bass to play at the same time. Here are two ways to deal with this. An essential tool in mixing is without a doubt the equalizer. You can use an EQ to give every element of a song its own space in the frequency spectrum, so that they don't mask each other. As you can hear, the bass pushes away the kick, so that it loses its impact. We can take a look at the frequency spectrum of a kick by adding a spectrum analyzer to the kick channel. As you can hear, the kick has the most power in the 50 to 60 Hz region. What we can do now is go to the bass channel and cut a little bit of those frequencies out, so that the kick won't lose too much of its power. This sounds much better. Sometimes it also helps to put a high pass filter at around 30 or 40 Hz to clean up some low end rumble. Then there is another way, which most of you probably already heard or know about. Sidechain compression. This is a technique in which you add a compressor to the bass channel and send the kick drum signal to the so-called sidechain input of this compressor. Now every time the kick hits, the bass will decrease in volume for a little while, giving the kick the space it needs. Here's how to set this up in Cubase. We add a compressor to the bass track. We activate the sidechain input by pressing this button. Now we go to the kick channel and use a send to route the signal into the sidechain of the compressor on the bass channel. Back to the bass channel. We can now use the threshold and ratio parameters to set the amount of volume that the bass should drop. You can hear it as well as see it on the gain reduction meters of the compressor. You can go for an extreme pumping sound, but sometimes just a few dBs of gain reduction goes a long way. We can use the release parameter to set the time it should take for the bass to go back to its regular volume. A more flexible way of doing this is to create a special sidechain trigger channel. I create another channel, load a kick sample or any sort of short percussive sample will do. I set the send to pre-fader mode with this button, so that I can take down the fader to not send it into the mix, but it will still be sent to the compressor this way. Now even when the kick isn't playing, you can hear the sidechain compressor working. What I also like to do is make the sidechain trigger play just a few milliseconds ahead of the kick, so that you don't have to set up a too fast attack time, which could create a noticeable click before the compressor kicks in. Sometimes a very low sounding sub bass without barely any high frequency content is all you need. This may sound good on a good sound system or big speakers, but the problem is that a lot of listeners will use cheap or small speakers or earbuds connected to their MP3 players. On these types of speakers, a lot of the low end can't be heard. So what I like to do is to add some saturation to these types of sounds, which create some upper harmonics and translate much better on cheaper consumer speakers. Now the trick is to not overdo it. You want your sub still sounding like a sub. A good and free plugin for this is Camel Crusher by Camel Audio. While adding the saturation, be sure to A/B the sound on your studio monitors and some cheaper speakers, so that you can get the saturation amount just right without changing too much of the sound characteristics. What I almost always do is create 2 or sometimes 3 separate bass channels. One with a more subby, deep or low sound and the others with the low end cut out, so that I have more control over sculpting the mid and high frequencies, without worrying about messing up the lows. If you're not really a fan of the pumping sound, which sidechain compression sometimes can cause, you can, for example, only sidechain compress the sub bass, while leaving the mid bass uncompressed for a more subtler effect. Or you could create different patterns for the sub and mid bass, a technique used a lot in trance music. Another technique is to keep the low bass sound in mono, which is generally a good idea, and make the upper bass part sound really wide by adding a chorus or a stereo enhancer. Or if you have a bass line pattern which you really like but a few notes get in the way of the kick too much, you can duplicate the bass channel, cut out the low end from the duplicated channel and move the offending notes to that channel so that the kick has enough space again. Now we don't want the kick and the bass to sound too separate from each other, of course. So sometimes sending the kick and the bass to a group channel and lightly compressing both can make them sound a bit more cohesive. I hope that you learned something from this video. Thanks for watching.